Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is a coaching episode with a mom of 2 little boys who are 3 and 5. Melanie joins me all the way from Australia. It was fun and challenging to find a time that worked for both of us to do the calls. And I think anyone who has spirited kids or is the parent of small children will be able to relate to some of the challenges that Melanie and I discuss. And be sure to stick around to the end for a check-in. Things went a little sideways between our first call and our second call, but that also gave us some interesting things to talk about. If you are interested in doing some coaching, some parent coaching, I work with clients one-on-one, and so do Corey and Stoney, the coaches that I have trained in peaceful parenting who work with me and for me. And if you think that you might like to have some compassionate and effective support and hand-holding along the way on this journey, if things are feeling tough, please feel free to book a session with one of us or reach out for a free short consult for me to, hear a little bit about what's going on with you and let you know how a coach could help. You can go to sararosensweet.com/about. Again, that's sararosensweet.com/about to see more about me and our coaching team and also to see how you can work with us. So let's meet Melanie and hear about her 2 sweet little active guys, Ben and Eamon. Hi, Melanie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. It's really good to see you. And
It is. It's good.
Followed you on Facebook and listened to your podcast, but to actually talk to you is really exciting.
And technology is amazing, isn't it? Because it's Saturday morning where you are and Friday night where I am. And It's amazing to be able to connect halfway around the world.
Yeah.
So why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, so I'm Melanie. I'm a mom of 2 very active young boys, ages 5 and 3. My husband is Australian, hence the morphed accent that I have. I'm originally from North America. Yeah, I work part-time as a high school teacher. My husband also works part-time as a high school teacher. Our older one, Ben, is off to big school in January when the school year starts, so that's really exciting. And our younger one, Eamon, is going to be starting preschool, and he's very excited about that. And we generally find our kids to be very intense. And so we're, at times really quite struggling.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you. And thanks for coming on the podcast. And as you know, as a podcast listener, it's really nice to listen to other parents and their challenges and know that you're not alone. And then, pick up some tips along the way when other people are getting coached. So thank you for being willing to be here and help yourself, but also help for other people. So thank you. So how can I support you today?
Where to begin? I guess we will start with my younger one, Eamon. He's the more intense of the 2. They're both busy kids. I had lots of comments when Ben was 2 and at the park, and older people would go, "Oh, he's a busy boy," and then Eamon came along and went, "You thought that was busy? Let me show you what busy is." So they're both incredibly clever and creative. Eamon has this creativeness about him where he just gets lost in stories, and he's he's incredibly imaginative. And the daycare noticed as well. They said, "Wow, the other boys are like going vroom vroom with a toy car, and Eamon's taking that car and turning it into spaceships that have fairies on them, and off they fly with the unicorns that turn into cheetahs and all sorts of crazy adventures." And he just gets completely lost in his play, which is great to see, but it can also mean transition is very frustrating. One of the biggest issues we have with Eamon is he's quite physical. So when he is lost in his play, like sometimes he sees us and he decides that we are a bad guy in his story. And so he'll come and just like randomly punch us, or he'll attack his brother seemingly out of nowhere. And sometimes we can pick it. There's been some sibling rivalry or some antagonizing going on earlier, or, Ben mistakenly takes something that was in Eamon's game but that nobody was aware was in Eamon's game. But other times we just can't quite figure it out. So it's trying to intervene and prevent things is tricky. And yeah, so we struggle with that. The other thing we struggle with is when Eamon has an idea in his head, and I joke that he takes after his father in this regard. You cannot change his mind. He's got this idea and that's it. So last night, we had a great example of this. We went to our local bowling club for dinner. This is Australian lawn bowls, and it's part of like the Australian culture. These small towns have these little restaurants attached to a lawn bowls, which is kind of like bocce. Anybody who's Australian or British knows what lawn bowls is. And so I knew the boys were super hungry. Like they had had a dad day, and dad sometimes forgets to feed them properly. So I knew they were hungry, and I said, okay, let's line up for dinner. What do you want for dinner? And they were so hungry. We had just ordered dinner, and the lady gave us the cutlery. And the boys each wanted to hold their cutlery. And I said, that's fine. And then Eamon started hitting Ben with the cutlery, which includes a knife and a fork. And of course, it's the exposed end, so the pointy end of the knife and the pointy end of the fork. So I confiscate said knife and fork. And then Eamon lost it. He just like immediately went screaming, give that back, no. And of course, everyone in the restaurant turns around. And so I'm trying to get Eamon out the door. And I said, look, if you can calm down a moment, we'll get outside and then you can calmly walk and carry your cutlery to the table. But he wasn't having a bar of it. He was just lost in his, like, he had to have the cutlery right there and then. I managed to get him outside, and then he like kicked me and essentially made me drop him, and he ran back inside, right back to the scene of the crime. And I was having a bit of a laugh with it because I could see the older people really getting quite triggered, because here's a kid screaming up at the top of his lungs, ruining their dinner experience. And I said to some of them, I said, well, look, I had to confiscate a knife because he was hitting his brother with the knife. Would you prefer that I give the knife back to him? And they all awkwardly went, oh, no, don't give a knife to the child. And I said, well, then we just have to let him have his tears, and I'm working on it. Sorry to disturb your dinner.
Well, it sounds like you handled it really well to bring him back outside.
Eventually, there was a lady who worked at the restaurant, and she helped to open the door, and she like literally pushed us out the door.
Oh my goodness.
It was like a bit full on. Eventually, I got him like well away from the restaurant windows outside, and I could see his dad was coming, and said, okay, we're just going to wait for daddy. And eventually we were able to calm him down to the point to walk back through the restaurant to the other side where we were going to be sitting outside in the children's play area. And then as soon as he started eating, it was like nothing had happened. But yeah, it was these sort of tantrums about the idea in his head that you can't change his mind have been becoming quite frequent. And like I had said to you in the writing, like the other day he had a tantrum where he ran down the road to get back to the car because, that was where the crime had occurred. And so we had to get back there, and it was quite a dangerous situation. And yeah, I'm finding that really struggling at the moment.
Well, let's go back to the restaurant for a second. I mean, first of all, it sounds like you handled it really well, and there wasn't much. I mean, the only two things that I could see, like, with our perfect 2020 hindsight,
Yeah.
is if you could have given him a snack before
Yeah.
right? Like in the car, maybe just something small so that he wasn't quite so hungry when you
Yeah.
got there. The other thing I wondered is, did you ask him when he first started poking his brother with the cutlery, did he have a chance to stop before you took the cutlery away?
No, unfortunately, I just grabbed, like
Yeah.
I
So
literally
that may have
grabbed
made
the
a
knife
big
and fork.
difference if you
Yeah,
had gotten
yeah,
down on his level and said, "Buddy, can you stop poking your brother, please? I'm afraid someone's going to get hurt. And if you don't stop poking your brother, I'm going to have to hold the cutlery for you." So that may have, it may have just triggered the sense of powerlessness when you didn't give him a choice. And, I think I can see why you didn't, because you just wanted to, you reacted quickly to make sure no one was going to get hurt. But I think next time, if you do have to, if you think I might have to take something off him, if you can give him a chance to adjust his behavior first, it might he might have stopped, right? And
yeah,
you may have been able to avoid that whole situation. And if he hadn't stopped and you still had to take it from him, you would have at least known that you did everything that you could to give him a chance, right? So those are the only sort of two things that I can see. Maybe you could have averted the meltdown. Although, I think with a kid who's strong-willed and has really strong sense of their own ideas about things and very little logic and very little perspective, there's going to be a period of time where you are going to have these big meltdowns and big feelings. And this is one of the things that maturity really, when maturity comes and brain maturity comes, as he has more perspective and more logic, that kind of thing is going to happen less and less.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I feel like I used to be better at like kind of, yeah, I guess intervening in a more calm way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think I need to get back to that. It is tricky with the two, and especially when one's hurting the other, I feel like that is a big trigger for me.
Hmm.
And triggers are definitely interesting, and you definitely talk about them a lot on the podcast. And
Yeah. I mean,
if
I think the other
yeah,
thing that just now that I'm thinking about it, even further preventively, when you handed him the sharp cutlery, I think you may have said, "This is very sharp. Let me show you how to hold it properly," or something like that. Just
yeah,
setting
yeah,
expectations is a really important thing that sometimes we forget to do, because to us it seems so obvious. Don't poke people with knives. Like that's like an obvious thing that, most people know. And even if, your 5-year-old probably is aware of that. But for a 3-year-old, sometimes I think we really want to set those expectations ahead of time. Yes, you may hold the cutlery and make sure that you're holding it like a big boy, or, actually, I don't like the big boy language too much. I guess in this case, it wouldn't be shaming, because you're just saying, like, this is the
yeah,
proper way to hold it. And it's
yeah, yeah,
not shaming him at all.
yeah.
So,
I think that makes sense. Yeah, the setting
mhm.
expectations. Yeah,
And I think that plays into the example that you had written to me about, that you just mentioned, when he was upset on the way, just to catch everyone up, he was upset on the way to the doctors because he had wanted to, you wrote to me about this, he'd wanted you to go back so he could get your bag for you. And you had buckled him into the car, and he was really upset. And when you got to the doctors, he took off the thing that you just mentioned. I think also, again, that thinking, okay, he's really upset right now. What are the chances that it's going to go further downhill when I let him out of the car? And maybe if you could have anticipated that, you could have held on to his wrist or carried him or something like that, where he wouldn't have had the freedom to flee, right? Because he really showed you that fight, flight, or freeze, right? He did the
yeah,
flee of the fight, flight, or freeze.
yeah,
So just really trying to think, like, I don't know. I was just trying to think of a funny metaphor. Like, you've got a bag of cats that you're about to open up, and what's what's going to happen when you open that bag up, right? Like, the cats are going to try and run all over the place. So you've got to have a plan ahead of time. Like, how are we going to manage the situation? And I think it's probably new for you, because it sounds like Ben, even if he is spirited, he is a little bit more predictable, and maybe
yeah,
not quite as strong-willed, and maybe not quite as single-minded as his little brother.
yeah. I find Ben, yeah, like he's more likely to sit and whinge for hours on end about something rather than, yeah, he doesn't usually resort to the physicality. Yeah, Eamon's very physical and he's very strong. Like he's insanely strong. So a lot of the times, like, yeah, even just trying to hold his hand while crossing the street, like he's insanely strong. So that is a struggle too. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and again with the street crossing, I mean, I don't know if that's just an example or something that comes up a lot, but before you have to cross the street, do you want me to carry you? Do you want to hold hands? Do you want me to hold your wrist? We need to keep you safe because of the traffic. What's your preferred method of getting across the street? You want to
Yeah.
hold hands and we can skip, Do you want to hold hands and we can count how many steps it is to get across the street? So maybe adding in sort of a layer of distraction while
Yeah.
you're doing things with him, giving him something to focus on. That might, something playful that might be
Yeah.
helpful as well.
Yeah. That might work for him because he does like the play and stuff. So maybe if we can, yeah, have like fun ways to do things that he doesn't want to do.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's like playful or peaceful slash playful parenting 101 is, when there's something that needs to happen, getting in the car seat or, walking down the street, whatever it is, how can you make it fun, right? Because that's the language of childhood is play. So
Yeah.
how can you try to find a way to make it fun? I mean, he sounds like he does that on his own in terms of like making it the imagination and creativity that you talked about, that it sounds like he really does that on his own. And so, how can you harness that a little bit to sort of make the day a little bit easier?
Yeah. 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 That makes sense.
Well, I
Um,
think that, I was just thinking about the other thing that you had mentioned in terms of when he suddenly decides somebody is a bad guy in his game and he runs up and does something. And then you also mentioned a sibling rivalry thing. So are those two different things? Like one is sort of like the, inappropriate in quotes involving other people unexpectedly in his games versus the, like doing something with his brother, or are they sort of related?
I don't know if they're actually related. Like sometimes they seem to be, but other times it doesn't. So yeah, maybe it's best to talk about them separately. Because yeah, the random like acts of aggression, that's the one that we really have no idea how to address.
Mhm.
And like art, so one thing that we have tried to do is try to be very mindful of what he's watching. So a lot of this was happening while we were overseas on our trip, and we were doing various plane flights. And of course, it's a bit harder on some airlines to control what the kids are watching than others. Like Qantas
Mhm.
was great because you can choose the kids channel and it's all rated G. There's nothing above G. So you're like, great, okay, that's much easier to manage. But then, on one flight he found a Spider-Man kids thing that was PG, and he loves the concept of Spider-Man and superheroes, but it was very hard to convince him not to watch that. And of course, we didn't want a meltdown while we were on the
Right.
flight. We save those meltdowns for before we get on the plane and as we get off the plane. So yeah, we do notice that when he watches things like that, he is more likely to be acting out those kind of games. So we
Yeah.
do try to, you know, be mindful of what he's watching.
I think a little spirited kid. I mean, my middle son, who's 19 now, when he was 3, he used to do this thing where I'd be in the kitchen and he'd run up behind me and like, I mean, you can see me, the listeners can't, but he'd like make hooks with his fingers, like dinosaur hooks, and he would screech and pinch me in the bum and scream baby pterodactyl. Like that was his thing. That was like, but it was really like he was trying to engage in play. Like it was a bit shocking. It didn't really hurt, but it was a bit shocking to have the
Yeah,
screaming baby pterodactyl coming up and pinching you on the bum while you're
yeah,
cooking dinner. But
yeah, yeah,
but it was really his way of saying like, play with me. I want some attention.
yeah,
So, I think there's probably a certain level of that with Eamon, or he's really like, he wants to get people involved in his game. So I think you could, I think you could do that. And then you could work with him on, if you want me to play with you, you need to, tell me what you want me to do before you come up and, do the thing. I
yeah,
think just working on coaching him around that,
yeah.
although he's
Oh,
little and it's
yeah,
going to be hard for him to remember, but I think you can keep working on it. And the other thing is, you could use the superhero thing to your advantage, and you could say, Spider-Man would never surprise somebody like that. He always tells people before he, wants to do the what, I don't know exactly what his games are that he's playing, but maybe you could talk about like a superhero code of ethics with
yeah,
him.
yeah. Yeah, that could be a good idea. That reminded me for some reason of another thing that he does is he seems to forget to verbalize what's in his head. And then he'll be like, I told you I want this one. I'm like, no, you didn't, sweetie. And he gets really quiet, it will either be in his game, like, I told you that you are this, and you're like, oh, did you? Or it'll be outside of play where, yeah, he'll get really frustrated about something that he apparently told me, but he didn't. So I don't know if it's just the 3-year-old brain still developing, but it's
Mhm.
like he said it to me in his head, but he didn't actually verbalize
Well, it
it.
sounds like his imagination is so strong that it feels real to him. The things
Yeah,
that he's
yeah,
I have that sometimes where I have a dream and then I can't remember, like, did that really happen or was that a dream? But,
Yeah.
I think it's a similar thing. Like you're kind of like, it's so real to him that he can't imagine he didn't say anything to you about it. So, I don't know how you typically respond, but I think I would try hard not to be defensive and say, no, you didn't tell me that, because I think you could get sidetracked by a power struggle
Power
of
struggle.
him
Yes.
saying, yes, I did tell you, and you saying, no, I didn't tell you. I
Yeah.
think I would just be gracious in that moment and say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I know what you want now, or something, and just sidestep the whole did you
Yeah.
or didn't you tell me, and
Yeah.
just thank you for reminding me, or maybe just say, I'm so glad I know what you want now, or I'm so glad
Yeah.
that I'm aware of this now, or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I'll try that. Because, yeah, sometimes it's quite funny, and other times, like, like, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, he sounds great though. He sounds really funny and just creative and energetic, and he sounds like a great little guy. And I know
Yeah.
it's a lot of work when you've got somebody who's that intense and has that much going on. So, for parents of intense kids, like, you've got to be even that much more on your game in terms of making sure your resources are not too low, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's really where my husband and I quite struggle to figure out the logistics of making sure that we each have some time away to calm down and, do what it is we need to do to refill our own cups. I've been doing a lot of work trying to, like, uncover triggers and things, and actually on our recent family trip, we had some time with my brother and sister, and that was sort of a little bit of an eye opener of as to how I must have been parented. So, like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But then one thing I do struggle with is in the moment, I might go, oh, I'm being triggered. And then my brain just kind of goes into, like, I don't know what to do now. Like, I don't know, like, what to do with that fact that I know that I'm triggered. And I'm also trying to deal with the situation. And so I get a bit kind of like,
Well,
I don't even know what the word
do you
would
want to
be.
talk about one trigger that you've realized that you're not sure what to do with?
I think a bit like one of the biggest triggers for me would probably be like the aggression between the boys towards each other. And sometimes, like, it's, like, they've been teasing each other and it's just escalating, and it's obvious that, like, you can see why it's happening, but I still find it really hard to calmly step in. I feel quite upset towards the child who is the aggressor,
Mhm.
and, like, I always say to my friends, like, I didn't know what rage was until I had 2 kids, like, oh my goodness. So I do, yeah, like, sometimes
Well,
I feel like I can handle it quite well, but a lot of the times I just get completely hijacked, and I just
yeah.
I don't know what to do, and I
Yeah.
also when I want to, when I'm calm and have time to kind of process, I don't really know what to do to process, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, well, let's take those one at a time. So, with the example of one brother being aggressive with another brother, if it's a totally natural thing to go into our own emergency response, to fight, flight, or freeze. In fact, we're built to do that when we see, our one of our children, we see our child triggered themselves, right? Dysregulated themselves. Our brains and bodies know our child is experiencing some sort of emergency and some sort of threat. And so we've got to mobilize to protect our child from the threat, right?
Yeah,
Even if, our amygdala can't tell the difference between a perceived threat and a real threat. And a person's own feelings, the overwhelm of their own feelings, registers as threat to the nervous system, right? So that's the I want to talk about that again in a second, just about the person who's being aggressive, the boy who's being aggressive. But it's totally natural for you to see their, intense dysregulation, and then get dysregulated yourself because your body is like, okay, we're getting ready to fight the tiger, or like run from the tiger, or whatever the threat is that they're experiencing. So that's totally how we're built, and how, one of our caretaking responses of our child. So we want to make sure we're not, beating ourselves up about getting, when you say, I never knew what rage was until I had 2 kids. Well, that rage is the same thing that, remember in the Superman, maybe you're too young to remember the old Superman movies where Superman's mother lifts oh no, wait, was that? I think I'm confusing something. I think it's Superman who lifted up the car, but I have heard of crazy stories where
Yeah.
like a mother can like lift a car up off of their child or something like that. And that's where that crazy strength comes from, right? When your child's in danger. So it's nature's way of helping you protect your child. It's just a little misplaced because of the
Yes.
amygdala not having a very good sense of what's appropriate or not.
Yeah,
So,
especially yeah, the
you
threat
know,
is the other child.
yeah, so give a little thanks to that response because that's, your body's way of protecting your offspring. So, I think you can just in that moment maybe remind yourself this is not an emergency. I can handle this. It feels like an emergency, but there's actually, there's no tiger here or whatever, and just try to kind of talk yourself down a little bit. And I think what will help you with that is to remember that whoever's being aggressive is hijack themselves, right? They're like, whenever we get hijacked by fight, flight, or freeze, the person in front of us looks like the enemy, and
Yeah.
we act in ways that are out of alignment with our true feelings and our true intent. One thing Tasha Shore, who I love for her work around aggression, is she says to shift from he's not scary to he's scared, right?
Yeah.
That's remind ourselves it's a fear response. So whichever boy is being aggressive, it's the fear of, if it's sibling rivalry, fear that my mom and dad love my brother more than they love me, or fear that, your brother's just taking a toy, your needs are not going to get met, whatever that fear is. So remind yourself that your own fear is, valid, but it's just not necessary right now. And that your child is experiencing this level of fear. And so I think that's something that I don't know if that resonates at all with you, if that's something that might help you in the moment when you do get triggered.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I yeah, yeah, it's definitely something. It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Like it
So
all makes sense
is
when
there
I'm not
anything
in the
that
moment.
I've said or that you can think of that you might have as a mantra that you could kind of pull out when those things are happening?
I guess yeah, I kind of remind myself like he's having a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's yeah, I guess the like he's hijacked. He's having a hard time.
Right.
Like
And
he
for
needs my
and for
help.
yourself, even like, okay, Mama Bear, that you can dial down your response a little bit. Maybe something like that. I don't know if that would
Yeah,
resonate at all.
yeah,
Just
yeah. Well,
recognizing that
it's
you've
worth
gotten
trying.
yeah, just even recognizing that your mama bearness has gotten activated.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for this protection response, and it's not warranted right now.
Yeah, we're
And
not
then
actually a lot. It's not actually a lion on the savannah. It's just
yeah,
my son.
exactly. And and I think it's important to like just to I know I've said it a few minutes ago, but it's important to appreciate that response because it's a healthy and natural response. It's just misplaced.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
So thank you for, for your protection for coming up here, and it's not needed right now where this is two little boys having a hard time.
Yeah,
And I think we also, we need to remember that the aggressor is being aggressive because they're having a hard time, as you said.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then in that moment, very often, like we never quite. I mean, I guess there's no necessarily right way to do it, but we do like if my husband and I are both there, like we can kind of sort of divide and conquer. But if I'm on my own, I'm never quite sure like the best way to handle it because I find very often, like if I physically separate them, the other one will come back to try and like keep fighting or yeah, like it just like I struggle with the like even
What
if
do
I
you
can
say?
stay calm in the
What do you try
moment.
to say to them when you do separate them? Because I'm wondering if we can tweak that a little bit. I mean, what I would I mean, I guess I'll just tell you what I recommend. You tell me if you're already doing that or not, which is to say to the person who's upset, most upset, we'll just say the aggressor, of course you're upset right now, right? Of course you're upset right now. You really didn't want your brother to XYZ, right?
Yeah,
And if they're both upset, I think you can say, everybody is so upset right now. Of course, you're both so upset, right? However, you can acknowledge the upset. I think that's that nobody ever wants to calm down unless they feel like their point of view is being acknowledged. So if you're just trying to separate them without acknowledging the upset and, giving it some I don't know the word I'm looking for, but just giving it some importance and some recognition, then I think that's going to keep the person wanting to escalate it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, lately I probably have not been that great at validating the emotions. I feel like, yeah, I'm just trying to not scream myself.
Definitely the first step, because you can't do any of the things that I just mentioned if you're losing your mind as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, like I know that mantra, like it's not an emergency, but very often I am quite worried about the boys because they are so physical and they draw blood. Like
Mhm.
they're quite, if they are really in the heat of moment, I'm waiting for the day that they have a big punching argument. Just
Well, I mean,
it,
to that
yeah.
point, are there preventive things that we can talk? I mean, how often does this happen often enough that you want to spend a little time talking about prevention?
It's probably, yeah, we probably should. Like, it's been, I think for us at the moment, it's been just a bit more heated because we've spent so much time together on the big family trip. We were gone for
Mhm.
7 weeks, and then we came back for 1 week, and then we had, like, the boys had picked up colds and viruses. So then we've all had another week at home on top of all that. So I think we've just been in each other's faces for too long.
Mhm.
So I think that has probably, like a big component. And I would guess that most parents, during summer break can relate. You get to the end of summer, like, oh my God, when's school going to go back?
Yeah. Well,
Um,
so a couple different things on prevention. How are you on? I mean, I know you mentioned in the questions that I'd asked you beforehand that Eamon is pretty mommy focused right now.
yes.
Yeah. So I know that can be tough to get special time when he's a little bit, resistant to wanting to spend time with his dad. But I do think that's something to work on, is how can you get the special time with each boy, because that, when there is sibling rivalry, it's almost never about the kids themselves and their relationship. It's about, who do mom and dad love more?
Yeah.
Who's the preferred child? Who's going to get their needs met? Is there enough for me? So, really trying to work on getting one on one time is really important. So, I don't know if there are any times where, you know, if there's something that Eamon really likes to do that your partner could take him to do, that so you could have some time with Ben. But I think and I'm not going to spend time right this minute helping you strategize that, because that's something I think you could probably figure out, but really trying to figure out how can you get some one-on-one time with each kid.
Yeah. 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 I've got some ideas. It's just trying to figure out the logistics of how
Yeah.
we can do it. Yeah.
And also, when there is a preferred parent, that is also a sign that the other parent needs to work on connection a little bit. And it's not,
Yeah.
because I'm not saying it happens when a parent's been like, not trying hard or something. It's not like, I'm not saying that, but it's always like, okay, there's a preferred parent. How can we work on our connection a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It
I think
sounds
that
like it
that's,
sounds like Eamon loves to play, imaginary games. So maybe that would be a one way that your partner could work on some connection with him, like playing Spider-Man with him, or playing some sort of imaginary game like that with him.
yeah. 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 My husband very much was like, okay, let's go like do this building project in the garden. And you're like, well, that's great. But,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that's
Eamon
not
likes that to a
deep.
degree. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
that I
think
mean, that's
just,
one-on-one time, which is totally different from the connection special time. And one-on-one time
yeah.
is great, but we often do it in more of adult-centered activities, like a
Yeah.
garden project, or, going to the store together or something like that. And those are great times, but really the connection is when it happens through play.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I think we tend to do more the one-on-one rather than the special time. But yeah, I guess we could, try to figure out how to explore that a bit more
And
and
even,
see.
even your partner could do some some connection time with both of the kids. It could be like a boys against dad game of some kind, where, dad's the monster and they're like have to catch him and, put him in jail or something like that. I don't know. But if there's any sort of roughhousing games that where it could be the two kids against him, that might be good for both their bonding, the brothers bonding, and also if Eamon is a little hesitant to just be one on one with his dad, that maybe playing with his brother too might help that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'll suggest that to him.
Yeah, so that's one thing in terms of the sibling rivalry that we really want to, if there is sibling rivalry, we want to look at how can we up connection with the parent or
Yeah,
caregiver. The other thing is with 3 and 5 year olds, they still have really low impulse control. And
yeah,
so sometimes you really want to think about limiting the time, limiting unsupervised time. And I know they're not like home alone or anything unsupervised, but even if they're in the next room and you're in a different room, then you're not going to be close enough to get there before fists fly.
yeah,
So maybe thinking about how can you have them play closer to you or to
yeah,
your partner so that if you
yeah,
do hear something brewing, you can step in before aggression starts.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely a good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's just really hard to count on people keeping their wits about them when they're that age. And I know things just tend to like, they implode fairly quickly. So I think it's important to stay close if you do have more intense kids like that when they're little.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I don't,
definitely.
nobody likes that answer. Because it can be so nice when they're playing in the living room and you're in the kitchen making dinner or having a coffee or whatever. But if there it has been sort of a history of things, going sideways quickly, and you don't have to do that. Like I always say, what's worse, the problem or the solution? And it might be that that solution is painful and, you'd rather just chance it. But I think it is helpful to stay closer.
Yeah. Yeah, there are times where they actually play really well together. It's amazing. And or they'll be playing each their own thing in separate rooms and it's lovely. But yeah, I think at the moment, yeah, as we sort of kind of get back into our routines and kind of resettle after the big trip, yeah, maybe not so much unsupervised time and actually get off the phone.
Hmm.
Like just actually focus a little bit on them and try to engage them in play might really help.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that will help because it's just too easy for things to blow up quickly before you get there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
There's one more thing that I wanted to touch on that you had mentioned before we say good night for me, good day for you, I guess, is that you had mentioned that you had some questions about Eamon and his sensory stuff.
Yeah,
That you had mentioned that he often asks. Well, actually, why don't you tell me about it? I know you said you have a friend who's an occupational therapist who didn't really think an assessment was necessary. However, I always think we got to trust our guts on if we're seeing something. There's often something to that.
yeah, yeah. Well, he's always been much more sensory than Ben, and like has sought out loud noises. But if somebody else is making the loud noise, is easily disturbed by that. He, yeah, he's just so much more physical, and like his nickname all last year was bulldozer or just dozer because he just would just plow into everything. And he very often like he'll run up and go to give me a hug and he'll like squeeze me on the chest and that really quite hurts and he doesn't seem to be aware like he's accidentally bitten me and drew blood just yeah and he when he eats dinner or lunch or breakfast he almost always bites his tongue or his cheek like he just
Mm.
doesn't it seems yeah it just seems a bit odd and he's always been quite intense like in that physical way so yeah I do it's yeah, like my friend, he'll watch him play and things and go, "Oh, look, he's not like there's no major red flags. I wouldn't worry about him." But I just can't help but worry a little bit. And my husband is concerned by like the high intensity all the time, like the high physicality. He's always yeah, like his games are always incredibly physical and yeah, like I do one thing that I had posted in sort of like a travel SOS on Facebook when when we were on the trip. Like one of the people who had responded, they had mentioned that maybe our kids were overstimulated and they were seeking to calm themselves down because like
Mhm.
one example was he was throwing sand at his cousins and we had hoped that the walk on the beach would calm him down but instead he was throwing sand so yeah like I don't know if
I mean, that all stuff. I mean, so I think you can have like, I mean, an occupational therapist might be looking for like sensory processing disorder, which he might not qualify for that. However, the things that you've said definitely do sound like he is a bit of a sensory kid, both seeking and avoiding. And I always just think of that as what kind of input is the nervous system seeking to feel regulated, as you just said. Like, he's doing, maybe that someone suggested he might be doing these things to regulate himself. So you can always just like you might not need an assessment, but you can always introduce different activities, which is what they call a sensory diet, which is introducing activities, movement, play, different activities that will provide that sensory input. I'm thinking things like, do the wheelbarrow walk with him. You know what I mean? When you're holding their feet and they're on
Yeah.
their or walking with their arms, do that up and down the stairs or around your living room, and see if that heavy work physicality helps him. You can actually look up heavy work and see, there's some, I've googled it before, and you can find some just like fun game activities that you can
Yeah.
play to sort of get that input. Because I think that it does sound like to me that he needs more nervous system input. There's also things like, swings, and I don't know if you have a trampoline or a swing set in your backyard or anything like that that can also provide that. I saw
Yeah.
something the other day on Instagram that was like a reel about how balance activities are really regulating, and they had like some images of kids walking on a log or on a line on the ground or different things. Obviously I'm not an occupational therapist. I'm just throwing out some ideas that I've seen,
Yeah.
but maybe looking into some of that stuff and inviting him to join you and play with some of these regulating activities. And also, that chewing and biting his cheek or his tongue sounds unusual to me, and I wonder if that's something that, I know Corey, who works with me, her son had a lot of trouble eating, and he actually had to do occupational therapy to learn how to chew. And so that may be something you can even ask your friend about, just that
Mm.
specific thing. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I mean, there's tons of kinds of occupational therapists. I don't know if your friend specifically works with children, but maybe they're not looking for the right things. So maybe it might be worth talking to somebody else if they still think that doesn't sound unusual. It sounds unusual to me. Just,
Yeah, yeah.
just like,
We sometimes we have a laugh about it, but other times we're like, why is it like almost every meal? Like,
and that hurts, right?
like the poor thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he was a baby, he like the heavy work just reminds me when he was a baby, he used to go into the study and like pick up the 2 kilo weight. Like, he was like 10 months old, and he's just walking around with this 2 kilo
Yeah.
weight.
No, it sounds like he does. I mean, that's the thing, is that kids know, they'll jump on the bed or jump on the couch because they need that movement to regulate themselves. And we often stop them from doing the things that are actually going to be regulating, which reminds me, the other thing you said was that he, would like bulldoze through things. That was actually something that came up in the summit interviews with Greg Santucci, who's an occupational therapist. And he talked about kids who will just like walk straight through another kid's setup of blocks, like they don't have a sense of their environment around them, right? And that's something that's a sensory thing too. I
Okay.
forget which one it is. I think it's proprioception of where your
Yeah.
body is in
Yeah, I think that
space.
term sounds familiar. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And and
Probably.
this might be stuff that he just, as he gets older, he outgrows it all, and isn't quite as disorganized. But it also might be fun to just see if you can introduce some things that might help him be a little bit more organized in his
Yeah.
nervous system.
Yeah. That sounds like it's worth a try.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've given you a lot to work on. So we will talk in about, I think we're going to talk 3 weeks from today and
Yeah.
see how things went. And yeah, do you have anything else you want to touch on before we hang up for today?
Well, just briefly on my older son Ben. Well, like when he's, they'll talk about pester power, but like, yeah, he'll just like whinge and whinge and whinge, or complain and complain and complain about something, like pitiful moaning. What's like what's the best strategy? Like, he's like, because I've tried like saying, oh yeah, it's like, I'm really sorry we had to have that limit. Like, I do try to validate. Sometimes I'll say, okay, well, I've already addressed that, like that's enough now. Other times I try to ignore it, and I'm like, oh my god. Like,
Yeah, it's scientifically proven that whining is like one of those sounds that across cultures really gets to people.
Yep.
And,
I will support the evidence. Yes.
yeah. So I totally get why it would feel really frustrating and hard and annoying to hear the whining. And I also think we just have to recognize that it is him expressing his feelings, right?
Yeah.
And I find whining easier to tolerate if I think of it as this person can't quite get to the tears, right? Because if he
Yeah.
were crying, you probably wouldn't feel so frustrated and impatient with him, right? If he were
Yeah.
actually crying. So whining is really like he can't quite get to the tears. And, I don't know. I think 5-year-old boys have probably already gotten the message that boys don't cry. Even if in
Yeah.
your family that's not a message, that is definitely a cultural message still.
It is
Or even
very
big
much
kids
so.
don't cry, even if it's not boy specific. So I would just say, if he's whining, I would say, you know what? You might just need to cry. Sometimes we just feel I would explicitly invite him to cry. Say, it seems like you're having a really hard time about this, and it seems like you're feeling really sad about this. And sometimes when we feel sad, we just need to cry and let the sad out. So that's one strategy. And, I think just keep reminding yourself, even if he just keeps whining and doesn't cry, he can't quite get to the tears. He's having a hard time right now. And really try to remind yourself of all the validation strategies that all the empathizing that And just one final thing about whining too is I think sometimes kids whine when they feel powerless, and it might not be sadness as much as powerlessness. So maybe look for some other ways that he can feel, have some power and some control.
Yeah. Ooh, a lot to explore there.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, well, it was good to meet you, and we will talk to you in a few weeks.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you,
Okay,
Sarah.
you're welcome. Hey, Melanie, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me again, Sarah. It's good to
So
see
it's
you again.
been,
Or see
yeah,
you.
you too, 3 weeks to the day. And how have things been since we last talked? Improvements, things that are still challenging? Give us an update.
To be honest, I feel like I haven't made a ton of progress. We had a lot of life upsets. Last time we spoke, the kids were sick, and then the following Monday, my older one ended up in hospital.
Oh, no.
So the
Is he
focus,
okay?
he's fine now. But essentially, he had had a virus, and as he was trying to recover from that, his body just like couldn't fight off the bacteria as well. So he ended up on IV antibiotics,
Oh,
testing
no.
positive for strep and staph. Like it was just,
Oh,
it
he's
was all,
okay now, though. That's scary.
he's much better now. Yeah. So yeah, we were dealing with that. And then him coming out of hospital, he was our main focus because he, he was, he was just so, the way I think about it, I think when he was in hospital, he just had no autonomy, and we accidentally put the cannula in the wrong hand because they had asked us at midnight, which hand does he write with, and we couldn't
Hmm.
remember, and he told us his left hand. So he was in the hospital with nothing to do, like he was just like he
And
just
this is your older boy we're
powerless.
talking about, right?
This is the older one, yeah,
Ben, who's
Benjamin.
5. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So coming out of hospital, his behavior was super challenging. He was still very whiny and whinging and teary, but also like very like uncooperative. He didn't.
Mm.
We were. My husband was really getting worried about him, like mental health wise. He was wondering,
Hmm.
like, is he all right? And so he became our big focus, and we sort of like all of our issues with Eamon kind of fell by the wayside because we were
Well, I mean, that's
focusing.
okay. And that's still, I mean, that's interesting to talk about. And we'll talk about whatever you want, but just a couple comments on, first of all, how long was he in the hospital for?
He was in the hospital for 2 nights. So, yeah, it wasn't an extended stay, but it was still, 48
Yeah.
hours of
Was
being
one of
bored.
you able to stay with him, or did he have to stay there by
Yeah.
himself some?
I stayed with him the first night, and then my husband stayed the second night. So he was never really alone.
Okay, that's
So
good.
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it just I mean, well, first of all, you just had this injection of being reminded of things that you already knew, and it was what you said last time was like, "Oh, it's good to have a refresher of all these things." So, maybe it was at the perfect time to go into this difficult season of him coming out of the hospital, and maybe things would have been harder if you hadn't, remembered your peaceful parenting
Yeah.
lessons
I mean,
that
I
you
was
were
able
thinking
to
of.
kind of put it in perspective and think about like, he probably he was probably powerless and had that no autonomy. And so, him, like at one point he was crying, like, "You never listened to me." And
Oh,
it was in response to me saying that he couldn't watch a TV show because he'd already, watched enough for the day. So, my rational brain was like, well, that's not a warranted complaint. But then I was like, well, let's try and figure out how we can how we can address the "you won't listen to me" complaint versus the limit setting, which was basically a lot of letting him just cry, but it did go on for extended periods of time, which was
well, that
challenging.
that was probably what he needed, though. I mean, you said you think maybe, he was powerless and bored in the hospital, but he was also probably scared because, kids know you don't go in the hospital unless something's really wrong with you. So,
Mm,
even
mm.
if you were reassuring him, there was probably some level that on which he was kind of worried. So he
Yeah,
probably got a
yeah,
full backpack in the hospital.
yeah. I think it was good that we did have that chat because I was able to think about that, like, full backpack, and that, he, like, needs some validation and he needs to let the tears out, and that was sort of something that I we got in the habit of, like, not really letting that happen,
Mhm.
from pressures from, the father-in-law and stuff, and, how it is with raising boys and not letting them cry. And even though I'd say it's okay to cry, but I hadn't really actually encouraged him to have a really good cry in a long time. So I think it was good that we had that chat.
Well, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we're getting there, and he's starting to come back to his normal self and being a bit more playful and stuff. He's still not very keen to cooperate on things,
Hmm.
but yeah.
And school had just started for you, right? Like we're in different parts of the earth. So I was trying to, school just start or holidays just start? Have
Well,
they?
holiday so we've got 2 weeks left of school, and then we're gonna come into the summer holidays.
Before summer, okay, so he was still in school and he missed a bit of school maybe for this?
Yes, yeah, and
Yeah, yeah.
he had already missed out on a fair bit of school because we had been overseas, so he'd been
Mm,
back at school for only or preschool for 1 week,
mhm,
and then got sick, and then ended up in hospital. So then it's been very disjointed with preschool.
mhm,
The first week back at preschool, they said that he didn't wanna play with anyone. He really they were worried about him as well because he's normally quite a vocal, independent, like, determined kid, and he just was very mopey. And uh,
mhm,
yeah, so that was a bit worrying, but yeah, he seems to be coming good now, which is reassuring. But yeah,
good.
it was, yeah.
Well, yeah, it does sound like it was good you got that little peaceful parenting injection before before that happened. Well, so in terms of we talked mostly last time about Eamon, and was there anything that you have noticed that you wanted to get more support on, or how can we use this catch up for you? It was since it's a little bit unusual and that you had something big happening while we were apart.
Yeah, I was it's funny because if you had asked me a couple of days ago, I would have said, "Oh, I think, like, I've been making progress with Eamon, trying to make sure I'm validating his feelings a bit more and trying to let him know when I'm gonna be setting a limit, kind of give him that heads up." But we've had this morning was an example where, yeah, just everything just got a little bit crazy, and Eamon didn't wanna participate. He's At the moment, he is obsessed with a certain style of pants, and
Okay.
he calls them the flat pants, so they're pants without seams,
Okay.
and he wants to wear long sleeves. And we're coming into summer. It's starting to get quite warm. So I think today they're calling for like 26. So I don't know, that's like 70 something
Yeah.
Fahrenheit. So it's getting a bit warm for long
Hmm.
sleeves and long pants, but that's he's very insistent on it all the time, which,
Well, what happens if have you tried letting him and bringing something cooler in your bag or something like that? Like what happens?
oh, he will refuse to change. The only way he will change is if he's getting naked to play in the water. And he actually said to me the other day, he goes, "It's really hot. I need to wear the long sleeves." So I was chatting with a friend of mine. I think I'm going to see if I can do some shopping and find maybe like linen or, some really maybe oversized white cotton or something, like,
Yeah,
because he's so
that's a good
insistent on
idea.
wearing, yeah, he's so
Yeah.
insistent on wearing these long sleeves. He does have fair skin, so it is like, I think it's valid, if you're living in a country where there's strong sun,
Hmm.
yeah, like the
Yeah,
long
I try to
sleeves.
wear long sleeves in the summer if I'm going to be out in the sun
Yeah,
rather than
so
use
I think it
sunscreen.
makes sense, but yeah, it does become a little power struggle at times. So
Yeah.
this morning, I actually had to hang the wet pants in the sun, and he only got dressed once those pants were dried, about 2
Hmm.
hours later.
Hmm.
So, yeah, and it's the weekends, we have time to accommodate that, but on a weekday, that does definitely presents challenges when we have to go to work
I
and
mean, can I suggest just planning in advance for that? And I mean, I know I had my son when he was a little tiny bit younger. He had this suit that was like matching hoodie and sweatpants that said it was green and it had like a dragon thing sewn on the back and a tail, and it said "Monster for Sale or Rent" on the front, and it was his favorite thing, and he wore it every day for about 6 months. And I just either knew I had to let him wear it dirty or wash it and dry it at night when he wasn't wearing it.
yeah.
Is there any way that you might be able to do that for this little time that this is happening with Eamon?
Yeah, we've been pretty good, like, up until the last couple of weeks at, like, keeping on top of laundry so that we always have some of these flat pants available for him, and
Hmm.
he's got enough long sleeve shirts that the shirts aren't an issue, but we did f fall behind this week, and that meant every single one of his pairs of pants were in the wash this morning.
Oh no.
So that
All right,
was, yeah.
note to self, put all of them but
Yes.
one pair that he can wear dirty if necessary.
Yeah. And the other thing that happened this morning is another random, my husband calls it a random act of violence, but he just, yeah, I was chatting with Ben, and Eamon came over with the book that he's obsessed with at the moment, which is a little kids comic about Batman and Superman. And he came over and shoved it in my face really
Mm,
hard, and it really hurt.
mm,
And I couldn't in that moment see what had caused that. And then he just ran off. Like he just
mm. And
and
you
this
were
was
busy
actually
doing
from last
something with Ben at the time? That's what the quote trigger was?
I
You
don't
were busy?
I don't know because we weren't really interacting with him. He was off playing his own game. And this was that thing that we talked about last time where he gets into his character, and he just gets really like, we somehow come into his peripheral vision,
Right.
and
He thinks what's in his brain is what's in what's in his brain.
yeah, so that was a bit confronting. And then my husband revealed that yesterday they were at a little playground, and Eamon was up the top of the climbing thing with the slide with another kid who was probably around the same age. My husband didn't give a lot of details, but essentially the two of them yelled at each other, and Eamon punched him in the face
Oh my
apparently.
goodness.
And that was my husband's fear, that Eamon would start attacking people outside our family. And I was like, but of course he didn't give me very many details. So when I asked Eamon about it last night, Eamon said, I didn't want to play with him and he kept following me and he wasn't listening to me. So, it was just Eamon trying to set a boundary, but they
Yeah,
were up in the climbing thing out of parents' reach. So
right.
I mean, yeah, like the parents couldn't intervene. So
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. I mean, and that's sort of what we talked about last time, which was that it might be painful, but just keeping closer to the kids to be there for those random fast acts is hard to do. But I don't know if with hindsight, if your husband could have seen what was happening, and I guess even better to get Eamon to be able to say, like, I need help, but both of those things perhaps.
I bought a few books and I've been trying to use them a bit more. They're from a company in New Zealand. What are they called? Like Wildling Books, I think. And
Hmm.
they talk about like how to process emotions and deal with them. One of them that Eamon's been obsessed with recently is called Finding My Calm. And so it's the 5 things I can see, 4 things I can feel, 3 things I can hear. I might not be
Yeah.
getting it.
No, I think I know what you mean. Like there are a lot of
Yeah.
those social emotional learning books that are great.
Yeah, and I did use one of them, like that sort of rhyme thing yesterday with Eamon when he got really upset. We were playing memory with a bunch of our friends, and he really, really, really wanted the little Pavlova card, and his friend got it because she happened to remember where the card was, and he was so disappointed because he had just missed out on it. The card was the one next to the one he had picked up. So,
Mm-hmm.
and this was the third round where we had gone around where he had tried to get it, and it was just too much for him. And so
Mm-hmm.
he was trying to grab the card for her. I could he would he wanted to push her, and so I took him away, and it was I at one point I said, oh, I'm just going to take him home and I'll come back and get Ben. Like, this is ridiculous. But I couldn't carry Eamon home because he was punching me in the face.
Oh my
But
goodness.
I managed eventually to get him to point out 5 things we could see together. And it was a long process, but we got there. And then in that time, my friend was able to pack up the game and put it away so that we didn't have any more argument over these cards. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, it was just so intense. But I guess that's the sort of stuff I need to keep doing with him, and yeah, and try to stress to my husband as well that we need to be more observant of him and try
Yeah,
to predict when, like, if he
if
is in this
possible.
weird game that he's playing, or if he's trying. I mean, Eamon was insistent that he tried to tell this boy that he didn't want to play with him. And
Mm-hmm.
apparently the 2 boys were screaming at each other. So, I mean, that probably should have been a pretty big red flag that
Yeah.
something's
two,
not down.
3-year-olds screaming at each other. Definitely somebody need somebody come to the
Yes.
rescue.
So, yeah, I guess that's just the sort of stuff, like, if I keep, um, working on that, hopefully we'll continue to make some progress with him. He's Yeah,
Can I just say something about the card thing that you were talking about, the memory game? I
yeah,
love that you said you realized it was too much for him. Like, I love that you said that. Like, I love that you could see that he was trying to manage himself, and it was just too much for him. And, I don't know if in the future, I love that because I hear a lot of compassion and understanding when you say it that way, right? Like he was trying to manage, and I think it's hard to sometimes recognize that when someone has a big meltdown and they're kicking and you've got to carry them away and all of that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I love that. And also, you could decide in the future, like if you see something that's starting to be that way, do you want to take a break? Like maybe even just taking a break. One thing I love to talk to kids about or to teach parents to talk to kids about, is how when we start to get overwhelmed by our own big feelings of like really excited of wanting to get the card or frustrated that we haven't been able to get it, our emergency brain takes over, and our emergency brain doesn't know how to do things. Like our emergency brain, I first thought of this once when I had a client whose son was trying to make pancakes by himself, and he was getting really frustrated, and he was, then he ended up having a bit of a tantrum because it wasn't going how he wanted, but he didn't want to leave and stop, right? Like he wanted to
yeah,
try and keep making the pancakes. And I said,
I can
you've got to
empathize with
talk to him about how amygdalas or emergency brains don't know how to make pancakes. Like that's not the right part of our brain, right? Or amygdalas don't know how to play memory. Like that's we need our thinking brain for that. And sometimes we need to take a break when our amygdala is starting to take over. Our emergency part of our brain is starting to take over. We have to take a break so that the part of our brain that knows how to do things can come back in charge, right?
Yeah, I
So
like that analogy, yeah.
talking to him about that, and also I think talking to him about strong feelings. And I think that some kids who are like Eamon have very strong feelings, and they get overwhelmed by their own strong feelings, especially in
Yes.
things like with games, or I thought you knew that's what I wanted, or my brother, or whatever. So just literally talking about strong feelings. You were having very strong feelings, right? And sometimes we have strong feelings, and that's a good time to talk about the things that you were learning in the book. When we're having strong feelings, it's a time to stop and see 5 things, and smell 2 things, or whatever the thing is that you were learning. And that's another good time to bring in what I just said about the amygdala. When we're having strong feelings, we've got to let our thinking brain come back online and start to take over again.
With that reminds me of this with the strong feelings, and Eamon's, as you could probably guess, always had strong feelings.
Hmm.
When he was really little, he would I don't know if I mentioned this last time, he would have these tantrums where he would just scream at the top of his lungs, "Go away!" And I
Hmm.
couldn't figure out if it was like he was telling me to go away, or maybe he was telling his strong feelings to go
Yeah,
away. And
everything maybe. this
yeah,
is this is
everything, like,
awful.
and sometimes what would help is I would try to sit near him and say, "Look, you're having a hard time right now. You're overwhelmed, or you're having big feelings. I'm here. It's safe. I'm here. So let me know when you need my help."
I
And
love
sometimes
that.
it would work, or then he would look at me and tell me to go away, and then I would like kind of hide a little bit, but just
Hmm.
like call out and say, "I'm here." But then, yeah, sometimes that wouldn't work. And so more recently, he hasn't necessarily screamed go away, but it's almost like I don't know if this is exactly what is going on, but sometimes when he's having a tantrum, it's like, yeah, it's like he's having a hard time with the strong feelings, plus any additional signals on top of that is making it worse.
Hmm.
So, like, he will
When you say
tell
signals, what do you
everyone,
mean?
like the other night at dinner, he was getting really frustrated about something. I can't remember what, but he was trying to tell everyone to just stop talking.
Hmm.
And no one was talking to him or loudly. We did have music going on in the background, which for me is a trigger. So, yeah, I was almost like it was almost like, yeah, his nervous system was just overwhelmed all at the
I
same
love
time.
that, Melanie. I love that you recognize that because I think you're exactly right. And I've never really thought about it exactly in those terms. So thank you for bringing that up because I think you're right that like he had reached his limit of what he could process. So the
Mm,
stop
mm,
talking, go or even go away in another case was just like I need to limit the stimulus around me.
mm.
Stimuli?
Yeah.
Anyhow,
Yeah. Yes.
stimuli. So, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I do love that parents ask me this all the time, "Should I go away?" when they're shouting, "Go away?" And a lot of there are some parenting experts who say, "Don't go away even if your child is saying go away," because if you ask them later, they don't wanna be alone. However, that has always felt really disrespectful to me, to, like, if a child's saying go away, to ignore them and say, "No, I'm gonna stay right here." However, I think you can do it in a way that doesn't feel like you're abandoning them, but you're still respecting their wishes, which is exactly what you're talking about, going a little bit away, right? Going over, so or going into the next room and saying, I'm going to come back and check on you in a
Yeah.
few minutes, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that, the experts who do say don't leave a child alone with their big feelings, they're trying to counter the you go to your room and you come back when you're done with this, right? They're trying to
Yeah.
counter that abandoning a child with their big
Yeah.
feelings. But I do
Yeah.
think we should respect kids when they say, go away or, leave me alone. We should find a way to give them space while still letting them know we're there and we're going to check on them.
Yeah. 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 I've definitely grappled with this on and off because I have a memory as a kid of, my parents not coming to check on me when I was like really upset about something. And so I don't want to have my kids have that memory as well. But then being screamed at, go away. It was like, oh, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Well, I
yeah.
think it's interesting that just like reducing the stimuli, actually giving him some space, checking on him, I think that's a really way to do it with a kid who has such strong feelings. And then
Mm,
talking about it afterwards and trying to help him make some sense of the strong feelings.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's something I try to work on a bit more.
Hmm.
Yeah, I find it really tricky because like sometimes he seems really receptive to chatting about things like that and he loves the emotion books that we have. And then other times he's just off with the fairies. Like he's in his own world and like there's just no like
Well, he's only
it's
3,
really
so that's
easier.
okay, I think. You can let it go. You can let it
Yeah,
be how it
yeah.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that I can help you with before I know we didn't you didn't get to exactly follow up on everything, but was there anything else I could help you with?
I'm trying to remember what my question was. Um oh darn, I
You'll
can't
think of
remember.
it as soon as we hang up.
Of course, yeah. Oh, I don't know if this was the question I was gonna ask, but, I mean, with Eamon, he's only 3, so, there has to be age-appropriate expectations, but Ben, being 5, he's almost 6, he's gonna be starting school and whatnot, and we've noticed that he really won't participate in the things that we know he can do,
Mhm.
like getting dressed. He just it's like I'm sure he's not choosing to tune us out, but it feels like that sometimes. And we'll get down and like I'll hold him on the shoulder and say, Ben, it's time to get dressed now. We've got to go in 10 minutes. Like you really need to get dressed. And you know, he's just like
What
won't
is he
even get
doing?
like he might be in the middle of playing a game or he
Mhm.
like this morning we're having a conversation. My husband was trying to get him out the door to ride his bike while he went running. And last night, the agreement was that this is what was going to happen. They were all going to ride their bikes, and Dad was going to go for a run. And this morning, we had the clothes laid out, we had it all there. We said, "Look, could you just get dressed while we get ourselves ready?" And he said, "Yep," and then didn't. So it was quite frustrating. And an hour later, when my husband's got to get out the door, like still no one's dressed, even though we've tried a few different times. We've tried to say, "Do you want us to help you get dressed?" And he'll run away. And like it's been, on a school morning when we have to get to work,
Yeah. I mean, I guess
he's
there's so many different things that could be. It could be that he's just not, he's much more interested in what he's doing in the moment and wants to keep playing and doesn't want to get dressed and go to school or go for a bike ride or whatever, which is pretty typical of kids this age. It could be that he wants you to do it for him because he experiences that as nurturing. That could be it. It could be that he has some like attentional challenges which you would not know until he was older because at 5 that's still pretty typical. But
yeah,
at one of my kids who ended up having ADHD, but we didn't know for his whole childhood, we didn't know. And I look back on so many things that we said about him or that other people said about him. And one of the things his teachers said when he was in kindergarten was that he had a rich internal life, which I think was a good way of saying that it was really hard to get him to do things because he was like thinking or dreaming or whatever. But, obviously we have no idea because Ben is only 5, but that could be something that if in a few years you still find that's
yeah,
something to look at. And it could just be just plain old the first thing I said of I don't want to do this because I want to stay here and play. And
yeah,
in that case, I think what you want to do is get like say you are trying to get out the door to go to work and school and
yeah.
he's not getting
As,
dressed.
as I'll just interject there. I think for us, it's come to mind. It's actually becoming more of an issue at bedtime. So we've had two
Mm.
weeks now of bedtimes past 9 p.m. because of this
Hmm.
behavior, and it's the end of the day. So we're leading to lots of
Well,
frustration.
well, what happens when you just stay by his side and you don't, I mean, oftentimes parents say, do this, and then they come back and the kid hasn't done it. But are you actually by his side and he's refusing to shift or move or
Yeah,
what's going on?
so many a time when we are there, like pajamas in hands, like let's
Hmm.
get dressed. He then jumps over our head to jump on the bed, or
Hmm.
he'll run away, and he'll run back downstairs even though all the lights have been turned off.
Yeah.
And it's
That's a good time for a problem solving conversation, not at the time. I know you don't want to go to bed. I've noticed that the last few nights when it's time to get ready for bed, you run away or do all these things. And I get it. You want to have fun. Nobody really wants to go to bed because life is so much fun. At the same time, we do need to get enough sleep for our bodies so that we have energy the next day. And, mom and dad need to go to bed too, and your brother needs to go to bed. So, what do you think we should do to solve this problem?
yeah,
So, I would have a good conversation about it. It's I think sometimes we get it's interesting. One of my podcasts coming up is about non-coercive parenting with Vivek Patel. That actually, by the time anyone's heard this, they will have already heard that one because of where we'll be in the schedule.
yeah,
But we do exactly talk about getting a kid to bed and how to do that in a non-coercive way. And I think the idea is trying not to get locked into what you want is different from what they want. And he and I
yeah,
didn't say this exactly the same way on the podcast, but in reflecting on it right now in this conversation, trying to get on the same page. So
yeah,
it's not that he's avoiding, you want one thing, you want A, he doesn't want A, and everything that he's trying to do is to avoid A, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
how can you figure out how can you talk to him about why, what needs to happen, what's going on, what might make it easier? So I think
yeah,
just trying to have that team, I mean, it sounds so sillily simple. However, I think as parents, we forget about that sometimes. So we
yeah,
just get
yeah.
locked into, I want
The
this and he's resisting. And so how can we get back on the same page? Because even a
yeah,
5-year-old understands that you can't stay up all night. Like, you have to go to bed at some point because we need to sleep for our bodies, right? And if he doesn't understand that, it's a good time to talk about it.
yeah,
So I think just really stepping out of the power struggle into a, hey, buddy, we're on the same team. What's going on?
yeah,
I
yeah.
wonder if that might help.
Yeah. So yeah,
Because
that getting
it sounds like you're sort of past where I might go, which is make it fun, make it a game, pretend he's a baby. But it sounds like you may have. I mean, I don't know. Have you tried that stuff?
yeah, lots of different things. My boys do like the me pretending to be a robot, or I we have been watching a lot of Bluey the other day, and there was the episode where Bluey's dad. I'm sure some of your listeners will know exactly who Bluey is.
We know who Bluey is too, and I actually have watched some with my daughter, even though she's 16, and it's very sweet. Yeah.
Show. But yeah, there was an episode where Bluey's dad was like pretending to be new to the world. So I was pretending not to know what legs and arms were. And the
Mm-hmm.
boys loved it. And they're like, that's not where your pajama pant goes. It goes
Yeah.
on this. I was like, what's that? It's a leg. Oh, what's
Mm-hmm.
this? Oh, it's a toe. Ooh, can I eat this? I like this. Yeah. We had a ball with it. And that was, I mean, it took 20 minutes to get dressed, but at least we got dressed.
Well, and you were connecting at the same time, right? You were
Yeah.
connecting at the
Yeah.
same time. You were joining them in their world. So there's so many benefits to doing that kind of play with kids to get them, to get them to cooperate. It's not just about the cooperation. There's so much that you're doing,
Yeah.
and you're building habits of cooperation, right? The habit
Yeah.
is we do this together rather than we run away and jump off the couch and run downstairs or whatever. But so I love that you're doing that, and I just think that maybe you and Ben have forgotten we're on the same team. How can we get back on the same team and get
Yeah.
into that sort of that more approach?
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
And 5-year-olds, almost 6-year-olds, also all children love to be problem solvers.
Yeah, I think I forgot about that tool.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's easy to slip. I mean, this reminds me also of something we talked about the last time we talked, which was when you just took the utensils away from Eamon. Like we forget that they're like little humans who have like brains in their head, who want things to work out, and we sometimes just treat them like they're appendages of us, and we just have to move them around and do things to them, just in the
Yeah.
sense of not because we truly believe that in our hearts, but just in the sense of being busy and the way children are thought of in our culture. And so sometimes we just don't think, oh, he's 3, he's 5, I should appeal to his sense of reason and wanting things to work out. It's not the first thing we think of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was
Yeah.
lovely to meet you. I hope that you do get a chance to try, some of the things with Eamon that we talked about, and that Ben continues to feel better. And please keep in touch and keep me posted on how things go.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think I've got lots of ideas now, and I feel reassured that I am doing the right thing, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have at least one pretty intense kid. And so that does, it throws, having a kid like that throws everyone off balance a little bit. Like, why is this so
Yeah.
hard? Is it supposed to be this hard?
He's definitely, he does everything at 110% or
Hmm.
more.
Which is going to serve him well. It's just hard right
Yes.
now when he's little.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it'd be good. Yeah.
And I have some of those that are grown up now, and I can't remember if I've told the story on the podcast before, but my middle son, he's the one that gets all the stories told about him. Pretty much. I talked about him, I know, earlier talking to you. But my sister-in-law, she lives kind of far away from me, but she has a 5-year-old who is currently very, very similar to my son Asa when he was 5. And she said that her mantra is, Asa turned out okay. Asa turned out
Oh.
okay. Like that she, and more than okay, he's pretty wonderful, but that she finds it hard, but knowing, okay, I knew Asa, my nephew, when he was like this at 5, and I know he's great now. So it's all going to work out in the end.
Yeah. Oh, that's so lovely, and how
Hmm.
validating for you, like, to know that
Yeah.
you've become a mantra.
I have a feeling that there are quite a few people out there who, like, I know people have said to me, like, what would Sarah do in this situation?
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of nice for me to think about. I don't know, I love talking to all of you.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing, Sarah. It's
Thanks. Well, I
nice.
mean, I
Yeah.
love doing it, so it works out well for everyone. Thanks, Melanie.
Thanks, Sarah. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can, sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.